Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, Shane Beamer, South Carolina, wrapping up fall camp. And there's been a lot of fun storylines that we've been monitoring during fall camp. And look, doing this depth chart prediction episode allows us to call our shot a little bit. Talk about the buzz that some of these players have generated during fall camp. Say, hey, who going to be starting for this football team going into 2025? And here's my general takeaway that I have for South Carolina throughout the offseason is we know there are some special aspects about this football team. Heck, you have two of the best players in the sport, one being LaNorris Seller at quarterback, another being Dylan Stewart coming off the edge. You have some elite talent, but you also had some question marks about this football team. Hey, what's the wide receiver position going to look like in 2025? What's the off-ball linebacker position look like going into 2025? Are we deep enough in the middle of that defensive line, replacing a lot of good football players? Dill, if you're a South Carolina fan that's been in tune with what's been happening during spring practice and fall camp, I'm not saying those questions are completely washed away, but I think you're sitting here at the end of August saying, feel better about those position groups than I did back in the month of February. And so if you can kind of formulate a complete team around a cat like LaNorris Sellers, this team going to be dangerous in 2025. Ain't no question about it. Want to get into some of these position battles, how they played out during fall camp, take our best stab at predicting this depth chart before we get into it. As always, the South Carolina fans, appreciate you guys. It's been a blast. And the amount of South Carolina fans who've been rocking with the boys all summer long been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. The boys have a banger. South Carolina, Virginia Tech one in the works as well. Appreciate you guys. Dill, without further ado, hey, before we get nitty gritty here, talk about some surprise starters. Is this the best roster that Shane Beamer has had during his time at South Carolina?
Man, I would say so, and it really does start with the offensive line. Like, you just haven't had offensive lines at South Carolina that you've loved. I mean, you've had some that have been cobbled together to be decent enough to win you some games. You've never had an offensive line that you felt like was an asset to this football team.
Agreed.
I look at this offensive line, I think it's by far the best they've had. The wide receiver group, probably the deepest and best they've had in terms of
Shane Beamer said it. Shane Beamer said it, and I was surprised because, South Carolina's had some dudes in the wide receiver room over the last couple of years. Shane Beamer came out and said, hey, we think this is the best wide receiver room.
But they've always kind of had like that one guy, maybe. It hasn't felt like a particularly complete group. I look this year with all these true freshmen kind of making some noise. You got Nick Harbor and Bennett back, who both had really started, I feel like, come on last year. I like what they have in that room, and I just think it's more complete than what we've seen. And you probably say that for other parts. Like, the secondary is probably the best you've seen at South Carolina. Again, maybe not the best defensive line we've seen, but like, it's not a bad defensive line. It's not like you have those big glaring holes that you've had, I feel like, in the past.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. I think it's hard to say the defensive line is as good as it was last year, and that was one of the better defensive lines that we saw in all of college football. I'll say this about the defensive line. I don't feel as concerned about it as I felt back in fact. I thought it would. I was concerned that this defensive line was going to be a liability in 2025, going back to February. What they did in the portal, what you're hearing from some of the other guys in the room, I don't know how good it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be a glaring problem in 2025.
And they have the monster. Like, they have a guy that really changes things in Dylan Stewart. So I don't think that should be overlooked. Like, yes, you got questions about depth, but you got a guy who can really take football games over in Dylan Stewart.
And I'll say this, what I heard about him in fall camps, like there's been a step that's been taken, which isn't all that surprising. Like, this kid was a true freshman last year. I mean, if he takes a step, you're talking about one of the more dominant players in all of college football. All right, getting nitty-gritty with this depth chart. LaNorris Sellers, quarterback one. Dill, interesting. I think Luke is probably going to be your quarterback two. And I think that has a lot to do with you have a transfer in Aaron Nolan, who I think is talented. You have a freshman in Cutter Woods, who I also think is talented. Don't really have the same skill set as LaNorris Sellers. I think the purpose of having Luke as your quarterback two is, number one, this kid's a really good athlete and can do some of the things that LaNorris Sellers can do. So if LaNorris Sellers has to come out for a play, you think you can kind of run the same offense with Luke. Got to keep LaNorris Sellers healthy, though. Running back room. Dill, Rasul Faison, your running back one. I will emphasize this. This is a deeper running back room than South Carolina had last year, got into some trouble sometimes. I think you could tell Rocket Sanders was getting a very heavy workload. I think they have the ability, especially with how much this team I think is going to want to run the football with the offensive line I think they have. I like the depth of this unit. Rasul Faison, though, is your difference maker. And I just bought my free – you saw it pop up in the email. I got myself a free Sewell shirt. I'm going to be wearing that when he gets his eligibility. Wide receiver position. This feels like one of those positions where it's like, is South Carolina going to be 8-4, 9-3? Or are they going to go 10-2, 11-1 and make the college football playoffs? It was not a very good unit last year. Outside of Joshua Simon, like there weren't a ton of guys that scared you. Going into 2025, the expectation is that this room is going to take a massive step forward. I'm going to put you on the spot, call your shot, so to speak. Top 3 wide receivers on this football team going into 2025.
I'm going to go Harbor, Bennett, and then I really don't even know that I have a great sense who's going to be 3. Like, it's probably going to be a freshman. I'll put that as the caveat, but like, which freshman? I don't know. You might have better sense than me, but it feels like you've heard enough pop from like really 3 of them, probably Murph, Sellers, and Rowe. You've heard good things about all 3. So again, who kind of emerges and takes control? I'm kind of with you. It does feel like Rowe's been at least the most consistent in terms of what you've heard.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like they're all going to play a little bit, frankly. And
I think that's what you're probably going to see, especially early, where it's like, hey, we're going to throw some of these freshmen into the fire and see which ones can translate the fall camp success onto the football field Saturdays in the fall. My pick's Brian Rowendell. I kind of took my stab here. Is Brian Rowe going to be out there for the first snap? I don't know. I think this kid's going to be a starting wide receiver for 2 different reasons. One, the feedback that we continue to get from Brian Rowe and how multidimensional he is. I mean, what he can do after the catch, what he can do when the football's in the air. This is a guy that brings another level of juice, a level of juice that South Carolina didn't have in the wide receiver room last year. It's not a shot at Jared Brown. Jared Brown I feel like we know what he is. He's solid. I think Brian Rowe gives this offense another level of ceiling, and that's why I'm leaning into Brian Rowe. Here's another interesting part, Dill. What do you think the role is of the tight end position in 2025? Like last year, this passing attack at times was going exclusively through Joshua Simon. Do you think the tight end position plays as big of a role? And more importantly, like, who do you think is going to be the starting tight end for this football team in 2025?
No, and it better not play as big of a role, because when your tight end is playing that big of a role, that probably says more about your ability to really operate an effective passing attack. Because your wide receiver 1 should always be your leading pass catcher, yards guy. Like, it's not ideal to have your tight end be that. So I think Brady Hunt's going to play the bulk of it. I think, again, when you look at what they need from that position, it's going to start with being able to block, because I do think this team's going to want to run the football a fair amount. So Brady Hunt's probably in line for the bulk of the snaps, but that's where I think Michael Smith gets into an interesting, like, what is his role? Because you got to find some way to get him on the field. And I think he can split himself out wide and play as kind of that jumbo slot.
Yeah, and now here's the thing, though. Is like, if these wide receivers are as good as we're hearing in fall camp, do you want to take your like last year, it's a no-brainer because I don't think you had that many wide receivers that you felt needed to be on the football field. With how good I'm hearing this wide receiver room is, do you see as many 2 tight end sits in the South Carolina offense?
I think there's role for Michael Smith and like jumping. I don't know that like they're Ohio State's wide receiver room right now. So I don't know that it's like you can't get Michael Smith on the field because your wideouts are too good. Like, I think the wideouts are good and they're better than we've seen typically in South Carolina's last 5 years or so. But Michael Smith's also a really, really good weapon for this team if he can develop some of that consistency. So I don't know that he's kept off the field in the way that some teams like in Ohio State maybe keep their tight ends.
I'll say, and I bet there are some South Carolina fans that are pissed at me, having Brady Hunt over Mike Smith. And I get that. We've had Mike Smith as the tight end 1 since the season ending last year. Dealt with and it also has a little bit to do with the feedback that we've gotten from Brady Hunt, like coming back from the injury. But number 2, you said it best. The first step for a tight end in this South Carolina offense, I believe, is who can give us the most value as a run blocker. But the second thing is, we need a safety blanket. You know, we need a ton of juice from the tight end position when our wide receivers sound like they're giving us more juice. No, I think I want to give LaNorris Sellers a veteran tight end that's a big body over the middle of the field that can allow LaNorris Sellers to get some easy throws. I think that might be Brady Hunt. We'll see. Look, I think you're right. Mike Smith going to play, but I do think they might lean on Brady Hunt a little bit earlier in the season with what he can do as a run blocker and the veteran presence that he gives you. Because that's another thing, Dill. Like if it's Mike Smith and not Brady Hunt, you're throwing to exclusively year one, year two guys on the outside. Offensive line, a ton of intriguing position battles all over the field. I think we know that Josiah Thompson starting at left tackle has the opportunity to be one of the best in the SEC. Boaz Stanley was a monster hit for this team in the portal. I don't think many South Carolina fans had ever heard of Boaz Stanley when he committed to South Carolina back in the winter. He's come in and comfortably won that starting center job. Then Trevon Baugh, man, talk about a guy who took a step. It sounds like Trevon Baugh has. You got a battle going on for right tackle, Case and Henry and Shree. I'll say this, feel pretty good about that battle. Like whoever wins that job, I thought Case and Henry played some dang good football late in the 2024 season, and I'm confident that Shree can play good football going into year 3.
Well, and that's like the type of battle you just haven't had.
What you want.
It's like a couple years ago when Trevon Baugh was starting and Shree were starting. It's just like, well, you're throwing him out there because you didn't have anyone. Like Case and Henry has a floor in terms of what he is as an SEC tackle. Like, especially if you get what you got from the last 6 games or so from him.
Sure.
That's winnable right tackle play. Now, Tree Bablade certainly has a higher ceiling than Case and Henry, but at least if Tree's out there, it's not just because, oh, we just needed to stick a guy out there at right tackle. He had to go win a battle against a quality starting SEC.
Yeah, and I'd say the same thing for freshman Shed Surratt, right? It ain't the same. Nick Sharp, Wake Forest kid, he can play. We know he can play. So the fact that Shed Surratt's maybe winning that job should tell you Shed Surratt's ready to start on this offensive line. Then, Dill, what about the depth of this offensive line, man? You talk about taking that step. You talk about making the college football playoffs. You got to be deep along the line of scrimmage in this conference. South Carolina's never had this kind of depth. Like, I think they trust Tree Babalade if he has to play. I think they trust Nick Sharp that he has to play. Rodney Newsom was a guy that I thought was very, very good coming from the G5. It sounds like he's going to be in your 2D too. There's a lot of teams that barely got 5 guys they trust up front. I think South Carolina's in the spot where they probably trust 7, 8, 9 guys up front on the offensive line. Going to the defense real quick, we are taking a long time to work our way through this depth chart here. I want to ask you this. Dylan Stewart's leading this team in sacks. I think we know that. Who is the number 2 sacker on this football team, and who do you deem as some of the most important players on this defensive line that need to step up going into 2025?
I mean, I'd imagine Brian Thomas is
Me too.
I look at Troy Pikes and Brownlow Dindy because those two, in terms of like talent in that interior defensive line, they're the more explosive athletes. Like Nick Barrett and Monkell coming back, like they give you good quality, dirty work SEC defensive tackle.
I don't want to overlook that, though. I feel like you're trying to find like the splash. I mean, we need that from South Carolina in 2025.
It's really helpful to have both. Like, I get that. Yes, I think Nick Barrett and Monkell Goodwin provide you a big-time service as the South Carolina team.
Yeah.
But in terms of, like, finding who's going to replace what Hemingway and what Sanders, and you're not going to, like, one-to-one replace what those guys are giving you, but you got to have something there. And Troy Pikes and Brownlow Dindy have that sort of athleticism and profile to make it happen. So those two I'm looking at, like, one's got to step up. I'm personally more of a Troy Pikes guy.
I know you are.
Troy Pikes. I think there was a reason every school in the country wanted him out of the portal. I'm looking at Troy Pikes as probably the most important player.
Yeah, that is. I mean, there's a lot of things that I'm going to be looking for during that Virginia Tech game. What the rotation looks like on the defensive line is probably the number one thing I'm looking for. And again, I don't need that interior defensive line unit to be as good as it was last year. I just don't see that happening. You lost too many good guys. Can we be solid? Because if we can be solid and we can be a presence in the run game, like we've been saying all offseason, how many programs in the SEC do you think can throw the ball all around the yard on this defense? You got to block up Dylan Stewart. Then you got a dynamite secondary. That's the key here, and that's why I focus on a guy like Nick Barrett, who I think can be very good against the run. Look, I don't think he's going to be putting up the sack numbers that TJ Sanders is going to give you, but can he be that presence in the run game, and we can rely on Dylan Stewart, Brian Thomas to give us that pass rush production? Off-ball linebacker, Dill. This Sean Murphy, man, is the guy you got to talk about first. And I know a lot of South Carolina fans are excited about Fred Johnson. I certainly am one of them too. What we're hearing from Sean Murphy being the veteran presence, although he has not played a ton of football, he's going into year 4 of his college football career, been around the block a little bit. It sounds like he's had his first full healthy off season. It sounds like South Carolina is very happy with what they got from him. Dill, this is the position I'm feeling way better about in terms of where I was feeling in February. I was straight up nervous about this linebacker room. Feeling a lot better about it going into 2025.
And at least what you have is 4 really good athletes. Like all 4 of these are like plus SEC athletes. Now, again, almost nobody has proven anything really at the SEC level, but athletically, they're all kind of what you're looking for, especially a guy like Fred Johnson and Justin O. Like those two from their athletic profiles are about as good as you want in terms of SEC linebackers. Again, still certainly got to make it happen, but they have 4 athletes who are certainly capable.
That's kind of why I point to Sean Murphy. Like, can you be that steady presence while Fred Johnson and Justin O are putting it all together? Because if you're South Carolina, again, I think you got games where you don't have to play your best football early to go out and win. You got some time to, build the confidence with some of these young backers, but you need them. You need them playing their best football in the back half of 2025. Secondary, this is where it gets interesting, man. We've been talking about this a lot. I don't know if we'll see it, but it's certainly a storyline. So let me cook for a second. Look, the secondary going to be good regardless, right? Who are your best 5 defensive backs on this football team? It's Jalen Kilgore, it's Judge Collier, it's Brandon Cisse, and it's DQ Smith, right? And then the 5th one, to me, that is important. Got to get 5. Vicari Swain, right? Do you see South Carolina do something like this at some point? I'm just going to go live on the fly. Jalen Kilgore, we know you're. I'm messing up my my thing right off the bat here. Dill, you look at Jalen Kilgore. We know you're a good nickel. What if we drag you back and play safety, right? Because I'm looking at it and saying I don't know if I want Vicari Swain sitting on the bench the whole season. And then hey, we'll move Brandon Cisse, who I think can be an exceptional nickel. We'll move him to nickel. And then you get Vicari on the football field. And Dill, it's not necessarily a shot at Peyton Williams. It's not necessarily a shot at David Busey. We've actually heard good things about them both going into 2025. But when I'm looking at, hey, sometimes we got to simplify the sport, man. Who are your best 5 football players? How you get them on the field? Now, again, the conversation has to go to, is Jalen Kilgore comfortable making the move back to safety? Because you don't want him. He is one of, if not the best nickel defenders in the SEC this year. I don't want to move him and get less out of him at safety. But if he is capable of playing safety at a high level, and that allows us to get a guy like Vicari on the football field, is that something that you think South Carolina might be thinking of in the 2025 year?
And it also increased the depth in a sense, because the issue is at the safety spot, you don't really know what else you have. You're kind of thin if Peyton DQ Smith and Busey are the only guys. If you can get Kilgore working back there, Miles Norwood, I think, is a really good reserve cornerback for this team. So I think that kind of gets you closer to the numbers you want. And at the end of the day, what you really want to avoid is having Vicari Swain just kind of waste away. He is too good to be.
That's kind of how I feel about it too. It's just, if he is as good as we both think he is, just because he can't get on the field in front of Brandon and Judge does not mean he should be on the bench. And again, they'll rotate these cornerbacks in and out.
Look, if Brandon Cisse was Judge Collier and Vicari Swain, who I think both are very much pure boundary corners, I wouldn't be having this discussion. Brandon Cisse, you've seen him play nickel at a really high level, so just put him down there.
I was going to say, Dylan, it might be his best position if we're being honest. I think he might be better nickel corner than he is boundary safety. That's not a shot at him as boundary safety. This dude, because he is not afraid to stick his face in the fan and go support the run. All right, we'll close it out there. You feel better about the depth of this football team. We knew they had the talent, right? When you have LaNorris Sellers and you have a guy like Nick Harvey, you have a guy like Dylan Stewart, we know we have the talent. Are we deep enough at some positions? Feel better about it. You still got question marks. Feel better about it than I felt about it back in January. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all Later.